The principal humiliated the janitor in front of everyone, but her response silenced the entire school. Margaret Wilson never imagined she would one day be cleaning the same hallways where she once walked as a respected university professor. Her life had crumbled 3 years earlier when a fabricated scandal destroyed her academic career, forcing her to take any job to survive. It was during the morning break when Principal Patricia Johnson found her mopping the floor of the main hallway at St. Elizabeth Academy, the most prestigious private school in Denver. In a voice loud enough for dozens of students and teachers to hear, Patricia pointed a finger at Margaret. "You're completely incompetent," the principal shouted, her face red with anger. "Look at this mess you left here. Someone like you shouldn't even set foot in this educational environment." Margaret stayed silent, gripping the mop with trembling hands as she felt the curious and embarrassed stares of everyone around her. Tears threatened to spill, but she held them back. At 42, she had learned to swallow the daily humiliation her job as a janitor forced upon her. "Did you hear what I said?" Patricia continued, each word dripping with contempt. "People like you are the problem with education in our country. No training, no knowledge, no—" Then Margaret lifted her gaze, meeting the principal's eyes directly. In a calm, clear voice, she spoke just one sentence in flawless Latin. "Veritas numquam perit. Scientia potentia est." The silence that followed was deafening. Students stopped talking, teachers halted mid-step. Even the sound of footsteps ceased. Patricia visibly paled, her eyes widening in absolute shock. The quote Margaret had uttered wasn't just some memorized phrase. It was a specific academic reference, a combination of Seneca and Francis Bacon that only someone with deep knowledge of classical philosophy would recognize. And Patricia had recognized it. "The truth never perishes. Knowledge is power," Margaret translated calmly, still holding the principal's gaze. "I believe you understood perfectly." Patricia's reaction was immediate and telling. She took a step back, her expression shifting from disdain to something close to panic. How could a mere janitor know quotes she herself had only studied during her doctorate in education? The history teacher, Robert Thompson, who had witnessed the whole scene, discreetly stepped forward. There was something familiar about that woman's voice and bearing, something that stirred memories from years ago. "Excuse me, Principal," he said, addressing Patricia but keeping his eyes on Margaret. "We need to discuss the exam schedule." The interruption broke the tense moment, but didn't erase the impact of what had happened. As Patricia hurried away, avoiding looking at Margaret again, whispers began spreading through the halls. Margaret returned to her work, but she knew something had irreversibly changed. What she didn't expect was that this change would only be the beginning of a journey that would uncover secrets buried for over a decade. That same afternoon, as she organized documents in her office, Patricia couldn't focus. The Latin words echoed in her mind, awakening memories she had tried to bury. She picked up the phone several times to make a call, but always stopped at the last moment. Margaret, meanwhile, continued her cleaning routine, but now observed everything with different eyes. She had come to work at that school for a very specific reason, and that morning's encounter only confirmed her suspicions. Someone in that institution knew the truth about what had happened to her career 3 years ago. During the night cleaning, when the academy was quiet and empty, Margaret had access to places that were usually locked. That's how, in the second week after the hallway incident, she found a box of old documents in the Department of Education's archives. Her hands trembled as she uncovered records from an academic conference 15 years earlier, held at the University of Colorado. There was her name listed as one of the keynote speakers, alongside other renowned researchers. And among those names, one that made her heart race, Dr. Pamela Johnson. The similarity to the principal's last name couldn't be a coincidence. Margaret took photos of the documents with her old phone and kept searching. Then she found a photo from the conference, a black and white image that made her sink heavily into the archive chair. In the photo, she was young and smiling, standing beside a woman who looked nearly identical to the current principal, Patricia. The caption read, "Professors Margaret Wilson and Pamela Johnson discuss innovative methodologies in higher education." Margaret's heart pounded. Pamela Johnson had been her fiercest rival during their doctoral years. Both had competed for the same international research grant, an opportunity that would change the course of their careers. Margaret had won, but Pamela had never accepted defeat gracefully. "I'll prove you didn't deserve that grant," were the last words Pamela had spoken to her that day, 15 years ago. "One day, you'll pay for stealing what was mine." Now, staring at the yellowed photo, Margaret began to grasp the magnitude of what might have happened. But where was Pamela now? And what exactly was her connection to Patricia? The next morning, Margaret arrived early, determined to observe the principal's behavior more closely. That's when she noticed something she'd overlooked before. Patricia always wore long sleeves, even in Denver's heat, and had a small scar on her forehead, partially hidden by her bangs. During recess, while cleaning the classrooms, Margaret overheard a conversation between two veteran teachers. "The principal has been acting very strange lately," remarked Mrs. Higgins, who had taught English for over 20 years. "Ever since that incident with the new cleaner, she seems like a different person." "I've noticed too," replied Professor Baker. "And have you seen how she avoids the hallways where Margaret is working?" Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now back to the story. The teacher's comments confirmed Margaret's suspicions. Patricia was clearly unsettled by her presence. But why? The connection to Pamela Johnson was obvious, but pieces of the puzzle were still missing. It was during lunch that Margaret got her first real clue. Emily, the principal's teenage daughter and a junior at the academy, approached her in the cafeteria. The 16-year-old had the same green eyes as her mother, but her face carried a troubled expression. "Sorry to bother you," Emily said, glancing around nervously. "You're the woman who spoke Latin to my mom, right?" Margaret nodded, surprised by the teen's directness. "My mum's been acting really weird since then," Emily continued. "She spent the whole night going through old papers and crying. I've never seen her cry before." "Why are you telling me this?" Margaret asked gently. "Because I want to understand," Emily replied, her voice strained with worry. "My mum's always been so private about her past. Never talks about her family, her college years, nothing. And ever since you got here, she's been having nightmares." The revelation hit Margaret like a punch to the gut. If Patricia was having nightmares because of her presence, that meant guilt was involved. Enough guilt to torment someone in their sleep. "Emily," Margaret said carefully, "has your mother ever mentioned having a sister?" The question made the girl's eyes widen. "How did you know that?" she whispered. "She never talks about it, but I found an old photo in her room. There are two identical women, and one of them looks like my mum, just younger." Margaret's heart raced. A twin sister. The pieces were starting to fit together in a way she hadn't considered before. "Does the other woman in the photo have any visible scars?" she asked, remembering the mark on Patricia's forehead. "No, she doesn't," Emily replied. "Why are you asking this? Do you know my mum from somewhere?" Before Margaret could answer, Patricia's voice echoed through the cafeteria. "Emily, come here right now." The principal had appeared at the entrance, her face pale and expression furious. She had clearly seen her daughter talking to Margaret. "I don't want to see you talking to that person again," Patricia said as Emily approached. "That's an order." But the seed of curiosity had already been planted in the teenager's mind. Margaret could see in Emily's eyes the determination to uncover the truth, a determination she recognized in herself. That afternoon, Margaret decided to be bolder in her investigation. Taking advantage of Patricia's absence for a meeting at the Department of Education, she went up to the second floor of the administrative building, where the principal's office was located. The door was locked, but Margaret had noticed that the secretary, Mrs. Fletcher, usually left a spare set of keys in her desk drawer. As a cleaner, she had access to that drawer for tidying up. Inside Patricia's office, Margaret went straight to the personal files. Among diplomas and certificates, she found a folder labeled Personal Confidential. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The first document that caught her attention was a birth certificate. But it wasn't Patricia Johnson's. It was Pamela Johnson's, born on the same day in the same hospital, but 5 minutes earlier. Twin sisters, exactly as Margaret had suspected. Digging further, she found medical records, reports from a car accident dated 4 years ago. Tears welled up as she read the diagnosis. Pamela Johnson, 39 years old. Death confirmed at 11:47 p.m. due to severe head trauma. The revelation was devastating. Pamela had been dead for 4 years. So who was the woman running St. Elizabeth Academy? Who was the person who had humiliated Margaret in the hallway? The answer came in the form of a handwritten letter, tucked at the bottom of the folder. It was a letter from Pamela to her twin sister, Patricia, dated just 1 week before the accident. Dear sister, I finally found out who was responsible for my loss in the international scholarship competition 15 years ago. Margaret Wilson used insider information she got through her advisor, Dr. William Harris. I have all the proof now. I'll confront her at next week's education conference. She'll pay for destroying my academic career. I should be teaching at a European university now, not scrambling for scraps at third-rate private colleges. When I expose the truth, she'll lose everything, her reputation, her job, her family, just like she did to me, your sister, Pamela. Margaret had to lean on the desk to steady herself. The letter revealed that Pamela had discovered something about her, something that apparently justified the accusation of using insider information. But Margaret knew she had never done anything dishonest to secure that scholarship. She kept reading and found copies of emails exchanged between Pamela and Dr. William Harris, Margaret's former advisor. The emails were dated 3 years ago, about a year after the alleged revelation of Pamela's accident. But that was impossible. How could Pamela have been exchanging emails a year after her death? The only possible explanation was terrifying. Patricia had assumed her deceased sister's identity to continue the revenge Pamela had planned. Margaret photographed all the important documents and quickly left the office, her heart pounding erratically. She needed to organize her findings and decide her next move. But her investigations hadn't gone unnoticed. Outside the administrative building, hidden behind a tree, Vice Principal Richard Miller watched the commotion with growing interest. Richard Allen Miller was an ambitious 50-year-old man who had long coveted the principal's position. He'd noticed the tensions between Patricia and the new janitor, and his experience in education policy told him something very serious was afoot. That night, Richard decided to conduct his own investigation. Using his university contacts, he obtained information about the academic past of both Margaret and Pamela Johnson. What he discovered left him stunned. Margaret Wilson had been one of the most respected researchers at UC Boulder before a scandal involving plagiarism and misuse of confidential information destroyed her career. The accusations had been made anonymously, but the evidence presented was irrefutable. Or at least it seemed to be. Richard was smart enough to know things are rarely as simple as they appear. If Margaret was working as a janitor at the same school where her former academic rival's sister was the principal, there was definitely more to the story. The next morning, Richard decided to confront Margaret directly. He found her in the cleaning supply closet during her break. "Margaret Wilson," he said, making her turn around startled. Or should I say Dr. Margaret Wilson? Margaret's reaction was pure shock. No one at that school should have known her academic title. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, trying to maintain her composure. "Of course you do," Richard said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just as I know you didn't end up working here by chance. You're investigating our dear Principal Patricia, aren't you?" Margaret realized she'd been discovered, but she also recognized an opportunity. If the vice principal knew about her past, perhaps he had useful information. "What if I am?" she challenged. "Then maybe we can help each other," Richard replied. "I have my own suspicions about our principal. There are inconsistencies in her credentials that have always bothered me." And so began an unlikely partnership between the PhD-educated janitor and the ambitious vice principal. Both had different reasons for wanting to uncover the truth about Patricia, but their goals aligned. Richard revealed he'd noticed discrepancies between the academic qualifications Patricia claimed to have and the knowledge she actually demonstrated in administrative meetings. He'd also observed her avoiding any contact with former colleagues from academia. "There's one more thing," Richard said, lowering his voice. "Last year I got a strange phone call. A man asked if Pamela Johnson worked here. When I said our principal's name was Patricia, he sounded confused and hung up. The information confirmed Margaret's suspicions. Someone else knew about the identity swap." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now continuing, over the following days, Margaret and Richard worked discreetly to gather more evidence. Margaret continued her routine as a cleaner, but now with an ally who had access to administrative information she couldn't obtain alone. It was Richard who discovered that Patricia's diplomas had never been properly verified when she was hired. The hiring process had been conducted by the former principal, who retired shortly after and passed away the following year. "It's as if someone planned everything carefully," Richard remarked during one of their secret meetings with Margaret. The hiring happened during a transition period when no one was paying much attention to details. Margaret was beginning to understand the magnitude of the revenge plan Pamela had orchestrated. Even after her death, her twin sister was executing the revenge with surgical precision. But there was still a crucial piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. How exactly had Margaret been framed 3 years ago, and who had orchestrated the scandal that destroyed her career? The answer came unexpectedly through the Portuguese literature teacher, Mrs. Higgins. The 65-year-old woman approached Margaret during her afternoon cleaning shift. "My dear," Mrs. Higgins said, her voice filled with emotion, "I needed to talk to you. I couldn't forget your voice when you spoke Latin that day." Margaret stopped cleaning and looked intently at the veteran teacher. "I attended one of your lectures about 6 years ago at the University of Colorado," Mrs. Higgins continued, "about innovative methodologies in teaching classical languages. It was one of the most brilliant presentations I've ever seen." Margaret's heart tightened. That had been one of her last lectures before the scandal. "When I heard what happened to your career, I was devastated," Mrs. Higgins said, tears beginning to flow. "I never believed those accusations. You were too principled to do something dishonest. Do you know the details of what happened?" Margaret asked softly. "I only know what was reported in the academic press," Mrs. Higgins replied. "That you had used confidential information from other researchers' projects to gain an advantage in a competition for an international grant. But I always found it strange that the accusations surfaced exactly 15 years after the competition. 15 years. The same amount of time that had passed since Margaret had beaten Pamela in the grant competition. The timing wasn't accidental." "Mrs. Higgins," Margaret said, making a risky decision, "could you help me with something? I need to find out who was truly behind the accusations against me." The veteran teacher nodded without hesitation. "Anything I can do to clear your name, I will." And so, Margaret gained another ally in her search for the truth. Mrs. Higgins had contacts at the university who could help trace the origin of the accusations made 3 years earlier. Meanwhile, Emily, the principal's daughter, was conducting her own investigation at home. Her conversation with Margaret in the cafeteria had sparked a curiosity she couldn't ignore. Taking advantage of her mother being at an evening meeting at the academy, Emily dug deeper into Patricia's personal belongings. It was in the attic of the house that she found a shoebox full of old photographs. The photos told a fascinating and disturbing story. There were dozens of images of 2 identical girls growing up together, playing in the yard, studying at the same table, graduating from the same university. But at some point in the chronological sequence, photos of one of the sisters began to grow scarce. Emily found diplomas from 2 different people, Patricia Johnson, who graduated in education, and Pamela Johnson with a PhD in philosophy of education. But what shocked her the most was a personal diary, written in handwriting she recognized as her mother's. The entries began 5 years ago. "Pamela died today. I can't believe my twin sister is gone forever. She was so obsessed with that woman, Margaret Wilson, that it consumed her entire life. The accident was caused by her own negligence, driving in heavy rain after another night of drinking and stewing in anger. But before she left, she made me promise something terrible. 'Promise me you'll finish what I started,' were her last conscious words in the hospital. 'Margaret Wilson must pay for what she did to me.' I promised just to give my dying sister peace. I never thought I'd actually keep that promise." Emily kept reading, horrified by each revelation. "Today I took over as principal of St. Elizabeth Academy using Pamela's diplomas and certificates. No one questioned it since we're identical twins. I'll use this position to carry out the revenge plan my sister had devised. Margaret Wilson will pay dearly for destroying Pamela's academic life, even if it means destroying my own identity in the process. Emily's hands trembled as she turned the pages. The following entries detailed how her mother had used Pamela's identity to contact Margaret's old academic rivals, planting suspicions and gathering information to use against her. The most shocking entry was from 3 years ago. I did it. I finally destroyed Margaret Wilson the same way she destroyed my sister. I used Pamela's connections to plant false evidence about academic misconduct. Dr. William Harris, Margaret's former advisor, was easily manipulated. He believed he was exposing a fraud. He'll never know the proof I provided was meticulously forged. Margaret lost everything: her job, reputation, family, just as Pamela wanted. Now I can finally rest, knowing I kept my promise to my sister. Emily closed the diary, her tears staining the pages. Her mother wasn't just an imposter using her late sister's identity. She was responsible for ruining an innocent person's life. The teenager faced a difficult choice: confront her mother with the truth or find another way to make things right. The next morning, Emily arrived at school with steely determination. She found Margaret cleaning the library and approached quietly. "I need to talk to you," she whispered. "It's about my mother and you." Margaret immediately sensed the gravity in the girl's tone. "What did you find out, Emily?" "My mother isn't who she says she is," Emily began, her voice shaky with emotion. "She's my Aunt Patricia, but she's been using my late mother Pamela's identity." The revelation hit Margaret like lightning. She'd suspected the identity swap, but in the wrong direction. It wasn't Pamela taking Patricia's place. It was the other way around. "And there's more," Emily continued. "She's the one who destroyed your career. I have proof. Everything's in her diary." Margaret had to lean against a shelf to keep from fainting. After 3 years of suffering and humiliation, she finally had confirmation she'd been the victim of a cruel, calculated revenge. "Why are you telling me this?" Margaret asked. "She's your mother." "No," Emily said firmly. "My mother died 4 years ago. The woman raising me is my aunt, and she ruined an innocent person's life because of a sick obsession." The teenager's moral courage moved Margaret deeply. Even though she was just a 16-year-old girl, Emily was determined to do the right thing, no matter the personal consequences. "What do you plan to do with this information?" asked Margaret. "Help you prove your innocence," Emily replied, "and stop my aunt from continuing this fraud." At that moment, Margaret realized she had more than just evidence to clear her name. She had a chance to expose one of the most elaborate academic frauds ever perpetrated. But she also knew the final confrontation would be devastating for everyone involved, especially for Emily, who would lose the only mother figure she had known since she was 12. During lunch, Margaret shared Emily's revelations with Richard Miller and Mrs. Higgins. Both reacted with shock and outrage. "This is more serious than we thought," said Richard. "We're not just talking about an identity swap, but a calculated crime that destroyed an innocent person's life." Mrs. Higgins was visibly shaken. "Poor girl," she murmured, referring to Emily. "Losing her mother and then discovering the person who raised her is capable of such cruelty." Margaret knew the next step would be confronting Patricia directly with the evidence, but she wanted to be sure she had all the necessary information before taking that irreversible step. Then she remembered something important. Dr. William Harris, her former advisor, was still alive and teaching at the university. If he had been manipulated into providing the evidence against her, perhaps he could clarify some crucial details. That afternoon, Margaret excused herself from work, citing a doctor's appointment, and went to the university. Finding Dr. Harris was easier than she expected. He still kept the same office. The 70-year-old man seemed to age 10 years when he saw Margaret walk in. "Margaret," he said, his voice heavy with guilt, "I never expected to see you again." "Dr. Harris," Margaret said calmly, "I need to know exactly what happened 3 years ago." The old professor sighed deeply before answering. "I received a call from a woman who identified herself as Pamela Johnson. She claimed to have proof that you had used confidential information from my lab to gain an advantage in the competition for the international scholarship 15 years ago. And you believed her? She had specific details about research only someone with access to the lab's files could know. Doctor, Harris replied. On top of that, she provided copies of emails that seemed to prove you had obtained privileged information. Margaret now knew those emails had been forged, but at the time, they must have seemed convincing. Why didn't you come to me for my side of the story before formalizing the accusations? Dr. Harris lowered his head, clearly ashamed. Because I felt betrayed. You were like a daughter to me, Margaret. The thought that you had used me for academic gain was devastating. I acted out of anger, not reason. And now, Margaret asked, do you still believe I did it? The professor looked her directly in the eyes for the first time since she had entered the room. No, he said simply. Over the last 3 years, I've gone over that evidence again and again, and there are inconsistencies I didn't notice at the time. Besides, I've known your character long enough to be certain you would never do something dishonest. Tears finally streamed freely from Margaret's eyes. Hearing those words from her former mentor meant more than any official exoneration ever could. Dr. Harris, she said, I need your help to prove my innocence and expose who was really behind all of this. Anything I can do, he replied without hesitation. Anything to correct the injustice I committed against you. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. With Dr. William Harris's support, Margaret now had all the pieces she needed to confront Patricia and expose the whole truth. But she knew she had to be strategic about how and when to make this revelation. The perfect opportunity came a week later, during the monthly school board meeting. Margaret learned about the meeting through Richard Miller, who suggested it would be the ideal moment to make her revelations. There will be representatives from the parents, the academic community, and the city administration, explained Richard. If you're going to expose fraud of this magnitude, it's best to do it in front of respectable witnesses. Margaret agreed, but she knew it would be one of the hardest moments of her life. Not only would she be revealing the truth about her own situation, but she'd also be destroying Emily's life. The girl would lose the only mother she'd ever known. On the evening of the meeting, Margaret arrived at the school wearing her best suit, the same one she wore for her academic lectures before the scandal. Mrs. Higgins met her at the entrance. Are you sure you want to do this? The veteran teacher asked. I am, Margaret replied firmly. I can't keep living a lie, and Patricia can't keep perpetrating a fraud. The meeting began normally, with Patricia presiding over discussions about the school budget and teaching activities. Margaret stayed at the back of the room, watching the woman who had destroyed her life play the role of the dedicated educator. It was when Patricia started talking about academic excellence and educational integrity that Margaret could no longer hold back. Excuse me, she said, rising from her seat at the back of the room. All heads turned toward her. Patricia paled instantly at the sight of her. I'd like to speak about educational integrity, Margaret continued, walking slowly toward the front of the room. This meeting is for board members only, Patricia said, her voice trembling slightly. I believe what I have to say concerns everyone here, Margaret replied calmly, especially because it involves the qualifications and identity of the person running this institution. A murmur spread through the room. Richard Miller and Mrs. Higgins exchanged meaningful glances. My name is Margaret Wilson, she said, her voice clear and steady. I hold a PhD in philosophy of education from the University of Colorado, and for the past 6 months, I've been working as a janitor at this school. The shock in the room was palpable. Several board members exchanged confused looks. I came to work here for a specific reason, Margaret continued, to investigate who was responsible for destroying my academic career 3 years ago, and I uncovered truths that go far beyond what I ever imagined. Patricia tried to interrupt. This is ridiculous. This woman is just a janitor trying to what? Margaret cut in. Expose the fact that the principal of this school isn't who she claims to be? The silence in the room grew deafening. Patricia Johnson, Margaret said, staring directly at the woman at the front of the room. Or should I say, Pamela Johnson? Patricia's reaction was immediate and telling. She took a step back, her hands visibly shaking. I don't know what you're talking about, she muttered. Of course you do, Margaret said, pulling a folder of documents from her bag. Because you took on the identity of your deceased twin sister to get this job and carry out a plan of revenge against me. Dr. William Harris, who had been specially invited to the meeting by Margaret, rose from his seat. As the former advisor to Dr. Margaret Wilson, he said, I can confirm she was the victim of false accusations based on fabricated evidence. Evidence that was provided by someone who identified herself as Pamela Johnson. The school board president, Mr. Edward Robinson, called for order in the room. These are very serious accusations, he said. We need concrete proof before... It was then that Emily entered the room. The teenager walked with determination, carrying a box of documents. I have the proof, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. It's all here. The diary, the photos, the forged documents, everything. Patricia Johnson looked at the girl in absolute horror. Emily, don't do this, she begged. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, Emily replied, tears streaming down her face. I understand that my real mother died 4 years ago, and that you took on her identity to destroy an innocent person's life. The teenager opened the box and began distributing documents to the board members. Here are the birth certificates of the twin sisters, Patricia and Pamela Johnson, she said. Here is Pamela's death certificate, dated 4 years ago. And here is the diary where my aunt confesses to forging evidence against Dr. Margaret Wilson. Chaos erupted in the room. Board members examined the documents, whispers turned into heated discussions, and Patricia collapsed into a chair, finally defeated. Margaret approached the woman who had destroyed her life. Why? She asked simply. Why did you carry on a revenge that wasn't even yours? Patricia looked up, and for the first time Margaret saw not anger or contempt in her eyes, but deep sorrow. Because Pamela was my twin sister, she said in a broken voice. We shared everything from birth. When she died, obsessed with your supposed betrayal, I felt I had to finish what she started. But I never betrayed anyone, Margaret said. I never used insider information. I earned that grant on my own merit. I know that now, Patricia admitted. I always knew, really. But Pamela's obsession became mine too. I needed to believe you were guilty to justify what I was doing. Patricia's public confession sealed her fate. The school board voted unanimously for her immediate dismissal, and the documents were forwarded to the proper authorities for fraud investigation. But for Margaret, the victory didn't bring the satisfaction she had expected. Watching Emily, who wept silently as the only mother she had ever known, was taken away, Margaret felt only sadness for the tragedy that had entangled so many lives. The following week, the story spread through academic circles and the local press. Margaret was officially reinstated, with the university offering her a prestigious position as compensation for the injustice she had suffered. But Margaret's decision surprised everyone. I choose to stay here at St. Elizabeth Academy, she announced during a press conference, as interim principal until a new one is officially appointed. The decision sparked debate, but Margaret had her reasons. Emily needed stability after losing the second maternal figure in her life, and Margaret felt a special responsibility toward the girl who had sacrificed so much for justice. Moreover, Margaret had fallen in love with the idea of transforming an elitist school into a true center of educational excellence, where people's worth was measured by their character and potential, not by their social or economic background. Richard Miller, who had hoped to be promoted to principal, was initially disappointed, but gradually he began to admire Margaret's transformative vision and became her strongest ally in restructuring the school. Mrs. Higgins took on the role of mentor to Margaret in school administration, sharing her decades of experience in education. The veteran teacher was moved to see her former academic admiration, bringing revolutionary changes to the school. Emily, despite the pain of losing two mothers, found in Margaret a figure of genuine support. The teenager decided to dedicate herself to her studies with renewed vigor, inspired by her new mentor's example of resilience and integrity. 6 months after the fraud was exposed, St. Elizabeth Academy had completely transformed. Margaret implemented a scholarship program for underprivileged students, created personal development workshops for all pupils, and established partnerships with public universities to offer free academic preparation. The school, once a symbol of elitism, became a model of inclusive and transformative education. And Margaret, who had arrived there as a humiliated janitor, was now recognized as one of the state's most innovative educators. At a special ceremony, held 1 year after the events that changed everything, Margaret was officially named the school's permanent principal. During her speech, she looked out at the audience filled with students, teachers, parents, and community members. "I've learned that true education isn't in diplomas hanging on walls or titles printed on business cards," she said. "It's in the ability to turn adversity into opportunity, pain into wisdom, and injustice into strength to build a better world." Among the crowd, Emily applauded with tears in her eyes. The girl, now 17, had decided to follow in Margaret's footsteps and study education. She wanted to dedicate her life to helping others overcome adversity through learning. Dr. William Harris, also present at the ceremony, approached Margaret afterward. "You taught me that it's never too late to correct our mistakes," he said. "And that true academic integrity lies in recognizing when we're wrong and having the courage to do what's right." Margaret smiled, finally at peace with all that had happened. "Every experience, even the most painful ones, teaches us something valuable," she replied. "The humiliation I endured taught me humility. The injustice taught me to value fairness, and loss taught me to appreciate every chance to start anew. As for Patricia, she was prosecuted for fraud and false identity, but received a light sentence due to mitigating circumstances and the fact she had caused no direct financial harm. She began attending therapy to cope with unresolved grief over losing her twin sister and the guilt for her actions." In a letter sent to Margaret months later, Patricia wrote, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know how deeply I regret everything I did. Pamela died consumed by hatred, and I nearly followed the same path. You showed me it's possible to choose a different way, even after terrible mistakes. Thank you for choosing compassion over revenge." Margaret kept the letter, not as a trophy of victory, but as a reminder that we are all capable of both good and evil, and that our choices define who we truly are. 2 years after the events in the halls of St. Elizabeth Academy, Margaret was in her office reviewing proposals for a new student exchange program when she received an unexpected visit. It was Emily, now a college student, accompanied by a group of young education majors. "Dr. Wilson," Emily said with the same radiant smile Margaret had grown to love, "I brought some classmates who want to see the school revolutionizing education in Colorado." Margaret welcomed them warmly, feeling deep satisfaction at seeing how much Emily had grown and flourished. The girl who had lost 2 mothers had found her own identity and purpose. During the visit, one of the students asked Margaret what the secret was to the school's successful transformation. "There are no secrets," Margaret replied simply. "Just the understanding that every person has unique worth and potential, regardless of their background or circumstances, and the courage to act on that understanding, even when it's hard." As she watched the young students eagerly exploring the school, Margaret reflected on everything that had happened. The humiliation in the hallway had been one of the most painful moments of her life, but it had also been the catalyst for a transformation that affected hundreds of lives. The Latin phrase she had uttered that day, "Veritas numquam perit, scientia potentia est," had proven prophetic. Truth indeed never perishes, and knowledge, when used with wisdom and compassion, is the most powerful tool for changing the world. Richard Miller, who had become the official assistant principal and Margaret's right-hand man, approached her at the end of the visit. "Sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed," he said, "when I think it all started with you cleaning the floor in this very hallway. And now I'm here as principal, not by chance, but because every experience prepared me for this moment," Margaret finished. "The humility I learned from scrubbing floors taught me to value every person in this school. The injustice I suffered gave me the determination to ensure no student or staff member is treated unfairly here." Mrs. Higgins, who at 70 still taught with the same enthusiasm as ever, joined the conversation. "Do you know what the most beautiful thing about all this is?" she asked. "It's that you could have become bitter and vengeful, but you chose to use your pain to heal others' wounds." Margaret nodded, looking around the hallway where it had all begun. Students from different social backgrounds chatted animatedly, teachers worked with renewed energy, and a genuine sense of community had replaced the old elitist atmosphere. "Each of us has the choice to use our experiences to build walls or bridges," Margaret said. "I chose to build bridges." That evening, Margaret stayed a little later at school, as she often did. Walking through the quiet hallways, she stopped at the exact spot where she had been humiliated 3 years earlier. Instead of pain, she now felt only gratitude. Gratitude for the journey that had brought her here, for the people who had crossed her path, and for the chance to turn a traumatic experience into a force for good. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from an old college friend. "Margaret, I heard about everything that happened, and the incredible transformation you led at St. Elizabeth Academy. The academic community is offering you the opportunity to direct a new research institute for innovative education. It's a chance to impact education across the country. Will you accept?" Margaret smiled as she read the message, but her reply was immediate. "Thank you for the offer, but my place is here. I still have so much work to do, changing lives one at a time." Because Margaret had learned that true fulfillment doesn't come from prestigious positions or public recognition, but from making a difference in the lives of those around us, one interaction, one day at a time. And so the woman who had arrived at St. Elizabeth Academy as a humiliated janitor became not only its principal, but the architect of a quiet revolution in education, proving that even in the darkest moments, there is always an opportunity to create light. The end of the story. Now tell us what you thought of this moving story and where you're following us from. If our Margaret made the right choices by choosing forgiveness over revenge, share your thoughts in the comments. We love reading every heartfelt word you share with us. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other transformative stories like this one.